So, how I navigated the loss of our third child, our baby, to Group B strep, and just like how I grieved, it kind of feels honestly like a fog and a big blur, and it's hard to even know where to start, but I'm going to do my best just to share kind of what some of that looked like. So, obviously, like when it first happens, there's so much just shock and like trauma and tears that happen the first few days. And we were really fortunate that we had friends show up to our house with dinner, the first night, and started a meal train for us. And people were bringing us food, and people wanted to come over and to be with us and to see us and to hug us and hold us and talk to us. And that was amazing. And something that was really beautiful was the first people that showed up with food just sat on the couch and were like, "So tell us about him." Like they wanted to hear all about him. And that was so touching for me as a mom, because you want to share your beautiful baby with others. Like that's the whole thing that you look forward to when you're pregnant, is like just sharing them with other people. Like you have this connection with them, but nobody else does. And so we didn't get that opportunity. We didn't get that opportunity to share him with other people. So it was really beautiful that people asked us that. And we're just like having that conversation, bringing him up, wanting to know about him, and letting us feel like he was part of their life as well. First few days are kind of like a blur because you're literally in shock. You've also just given birth. So you're recovering, you're bleeding, your milk's coming in, and you're going through all the normal postpartum stages with nothing to show for it. And that feels very, very painful. It feels wrong. It felt so unfair. It did. But the first few days are kind of a blur. People are coming over, they're giving you food, you're planning a service and a funeral, and you're going to a mortuary to do all of that, and you're communicating with family members. And so you kind of go into planning mode and like, making all the preparations, and people are coming, and you're also taking care of your other children. And in some ways it's a blessing because it gives you something to focus on. I remember the first night being like, I don't even know if we're gonna sleep. And I could literally feel people's prayers like holding our house up. I said that to Peter. I was like, I can feel people praying for us. And that was also really, really beautiful. The first night, I would just wake up every couple of hours and Peter would be gone. And I would go find him, and he would be in another part of the house just crying. And we would cry together, and I'd be like, come on, let's go back to bed. And that was the worst night, was the first night, I have to say. After that, sleep got better, I think, just from exhaustion, for me, for a period of time. Sleep the whole first year afterwards, especially the first probably 9 months, was the worst. You go through like a series, and this is jumping a little bit ahead, but you go through a series of like night terrors. And it's not even night terrors in the fact that like I didn't have nightmares, I didn't like wake up screaming, but I would just be like abnormally afraid of the dark, abnormally afraid of intrusive thoughts. Like I'm not a person that's afraid, I'm not a person that lives in fear, like I'm totally not that person. And I definitely went through a phase where like I couldn't watch anything, I couldn't listen to anything, I couldn't see anything that would potentially put any kind of paranormal thoughts into my head or anything like that, because at nighttime I would just get like totally freaked out. That definitely has gone away. That was a period of time. But back to the first like few days in the first week. So people come and there's a service, and it was really beautiful having everybody show up and having everybody there and everybody supporting. And after the first few days of people constantly being there and you're constantly reliving it and you're constantly crying, you kind of go, or I went through a period of time where my tears just kind of dried up for a few days. And we were even at the funeral, like not crying when we stood there talking about him and like sharing his story. And I felt so guilty for that, but I also knew it was normal. So I was really trying to give myself grace. I think at the funeral, again, you're still just like trying to hold it together and like get through this service. And I didn't want to traumatize the kids even more. So I didn't want to be like a complete mess. And I wanted to show up for my baby. I wanted him to be really honored at this funeral. So definitely like was not really even crying. And again, Peter and I felt really weird that we weren't crying at his service, but we were also just like, you're in such like an out of body experience at that point in time. And then everybody left. Everybody was out here. Everybody came out for the funeral. And then after that was done, everybody left. Everybody started to go back to their homes. We still had food coming from people, which was beautiful. But everybody left and our kids started school. And I just remember like that week of them going back to school, just like sitting at the kitchen table, just crying every morning. And again, I knew that was normal and I gave myself grace, but it felt like I was really spiraling in the what ifs and what could have beens and should have beens, and we didn't have answers at that point. And so like you're driving yourself crazy with all of the, what was it? What caused this? How could we have missed this type thing? I really focused on like structuring my days to give myself some sense of routine. And I really also focused on eating and like nourishing my body and my hormones, because I knew that like my cortisol was probably through the roof. I had also just given birth. And so I like wanted to have something to think about and focus on. And so I tried to get like some sort of movement in, not obviously the first couple of weeks because you're postpartum, but as soon as I could, right? I started to try to get some movement in, but I also really focused on like eating in the morning before I had my coffee and like doing things that I knew that would really help start to balance out my hormones. Because I didn't want to add that on top of everything else. And 3 weeks after he was born, I hit like a wall in my postpartum recovery because I had been up so much and about for the first couple of weeks that I literally, by week 3, was like, oh my God, I think I have prolapse. I'm in so much pain. Like I have to be icing everything all the time. And it was crazy for me because I felt great the first couple of weeks. And I really think that was the shock. And so then everything hit me at like 3 weeks and I had to get back into bed and really had to like take care of myself and slow down and spend a lot of time in bed. Honestly, the first month is just kind of a blur thinking about like, what did grief even look like? I feel like I was crying all the time. I was really trying to have moments when my kids were home from school to not constantly be crying. But when they were at school, I definitely was having those periods of crying, and I knew that that was just normal, and I was just giving myself a lot of grace in that. There were a couple people in my life at the time who I considered really good friends, and they also really thought that they could help me by offering insights that maybe they thought they had from like a spiritual perspective. And the things that they told me were maybe helpful at the time. They were definitely talking to me about like another baby and like God isn't done with this and all of that. And I think that in the moment felt good because it gave me something to latch onto as far as like hope went. But in the long run, I actually think it was kind of hurtful, or not hurtful, but it like perpetuated my grief or pushed everything out later for me to grieve more, because I so quickly jumped to next and like hope and like what I should be focusing on with this story, instead of letting myself really acknowledge and feel the current part of the story. And so in that aspect, I was really up and down, and I really clung to hope. I really was like in the thought process of like, we're supposed to focus on the promise, and we're supposed to focus on like what God said is coming, and like this isn't done, and this isn't the end, and blah, 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 blah. And that was really hard for Peter because he felt like then he was the only one grieving. But then at the same time, I would definitely have moments where I would totally like spiral in the what ifs and should have beens and could have beens. And that also would happen more in conjunction with my hormones. I got my period back by 5 weeks postpartum, and my period would be this huge roller coaster. And so when my period would show up, I would totally like be very emotional, very sad, like almost like grieving all over again. And partially because at like, I don't know, a couple months postpartum, we decided to be open to pregnancy again. And every month getting my period would feel like not just grieving all over again the loss, but also grieving the fact that we weren't pregnant. We are, 16 months removed, and we're still not pregnant, and that's never happened before. We've always gotten pregnant on the first try. So it's felt like every month getting my period is just this reminder of loss, but also a reminder that like we're not moving forward. And so that's been, I think, a prolonger maybe of grief for me, because I moved so quickly to hope, and then that hope didn't happen. And instead of letting myself really sit in the grief and feel it and like work through it, I kind of like pushed it out. And then it was like this slower, more painful process that I started to have to face, like starting in January or February. So I had him in August, and then starting like January or February, I felt like things really started to like sink in, and I really started to have to face it. And it almost felt even worse because I had pushed it off in some ways. And grief is not linear, and it's not something that you can control. And I know that. I've been through grief before. This felt really heavy. It felt like it just felt like a constant battle of the mind. A constant battle of the mind, because you're constantly seeing other pregnant women that are giving birth. You're seeing all these people who are pregnant around the same time as you or giving birth after you. And they get their beautiful baby, they get their happily ever after story. And you feel really alone in that. You feel like other people don't understand because they don't. And it feels really unfair that other people get their happily ever after and you don't. And all of that's normal. And I let myself feel all of it. I let myself be angry that other people got their story and I didn't. Like, I let myself have all of it come through without judging myself for how I felt, because there was a part of me that felt really happy that I was sleeping at night. And then I felt guilty for being happy that I was sleeping at night. But you also know, like, you would do anything and you would go through anything to have them and to have a different outcome and to have a different story. You would happily sacrifice sleep. Like, you would happily sacrifice any of that. I think in the beginning it was harder for Peter and I to connect over our grief, because when he would be sitting in like the grief and the loss and the ending, I would be sitting and like, no, we're supposed to keep hoping. This isn't an ending. Like, stay with me in this promise and in this belief. And he would be like, don't tell me that I can't be upset. Like, don't tell me that I can't be grieving my son. And so both of us, I think, struggled to connect in that. And it's something that we really had to work through and give each other a lot of grace and a lot of space, and not make each other wrong for how we were doing it. So for me, grief was just one big roller coaster, especially for the first 9 to 10 months. it was just a roller coaster. There were some good, beautiful moments of happiness and joy, moments with my kids, and feeling so thankful for them and thankful for the life that we have. And there were so many hard moments where it felt like I just couldn't keep going and I just couldn't keep doing this. And I felt really alone. And it just felt like every day I was just trying to get up and like take care of myself and take care of my kids and take care of my husband, and that's all I could do. Friendships fell away. A lot of things in my life slowed down and fell away. Like I had no motivation to do anything, no motivation to talk to people, like hang out, like none of that. Like all of that died. I felt like I was exhausted and I had nothing to give. Like literally nothing to give. Like I was below empty most days. And I did get up and I did work out and I did eat well and I did take care of my kids and get them to school and all of that, but it literally was exhausting. And it felt like I was just exhausted at the end of every day. I think it also took my hormones a while to regulate, took my period a while to regulate, but slowly, like just with time, things do start to get better, and they did start to get better for me. I would say probably starting in like May, and then going through the summer, like my sleep started to get better. Once my sleep started to get better, other things started to get better, and I began to have times in my cycle where things didn't feel quite as exhausting. But it still felt like a roller coaster every month with my period. And that's gotten better as I've been able to let go of having another child. That's a whole other topic. I can do a whole other video of that, but I really had to make peace with not just his death, I had to make peace with being okay with not having any more kids. And as I've been able to work through those things and find that peace, things have become much less of a roller coaster. And I've definitely gotten help from some doctors with my hormones and things like that to really help and to help me feel better. And I definitely think that's helped. But all of it's just been a process of time and letting every day be different, letting myself be different, letting my desires be different, not shaming or shooting on myself. If one day I feel like doing something and then the next day I'm like, nope, don't want to do that at all, right? Or one day I feel like hanging out with this person and then the next day I'm like, nope, don't want to hang out with them at all. Like really just giving myself space and grace and permission in that, because I've been through something extremely traumatic and I get to move through it how I move through it, and I get to give myself permission to let it be unique to me and to let myself get there when I get there. So I've really tried in that regard to honor myself and what I feel I can do, what I feel I need, what I feel I want, what's going to actually be beneficial for me right now. And I've really just given myself permission to not like force things or rush things or make myself do certain things if I don't feel ready for them. Something that really helped me, a therapist told me to get a journal and to write his story, like write all about his pregnancy, write all about the labor and delivery, write about telling our kids about the pregnancy, like all of it, like write his story and write him down and start sharing that and getting that kind of out of me. And he said that that would help me in grieving. And he was right. As I started to write, as I started to journal, it did help because it felt like talking it out without actually talking it out. And I have found that that definitely was helpful. I think grief for me was a natural like evaluation of my life and things that were in my life that were serving me or not. And so it was really beautiful in the fact that it really highlighted what was giving me life and what was adding to my life as opposed to taking away. And because grief is so heavy and so hard, or it was for me in this, I didn't have the bandwidth for anything in my life that wasn't giving me life and adding to my life. I didn't have anything, I didn't have room for anything that felt like it took from me or took energy or took anything. I literally had nothing to give. And so I got to really clean out a lot of my life and let some things fall away, let some relationships fall away, and that was really beautiful because it allowed me to lean more into me and having things and people in my life that were really there for me and really wanted to add to me. Honestly, the first year felt like a fog. Most of it felt like a fog. Most of it felt like effort. Even fun things felt like a lot of effort. And I know that that's all normal. And I just focused on what was in front of me and like the day that I was in today, instead of like going down the road and thinking about down the road and decisions that were coming or things like that. I really just focused on like today. What am I going to do today to like take care of myself today, to show up for my kids and to connect with my husband? Those were like my only priorities every day for like at least a year. It was taking care of me, my kids, connecting with my husband. That's it. And I got help. I got a lot of help in everything else. Got a lot of help, or I let it go, or I restructured it somehow. But that was it, because that's all I could do. And I knew those were the things that mattered the most. If you're someone that's walking through it, I'm just sending you so much love and telling you, like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I promise it will get better. You can make it through this. And someday we will look back at this and it won't hurt so bad. Someday we'll look back at this and we'll realize like we made it. We made it and we're stronger than we realize. And it's not going to be our whole life. It's not going to be this way our whole life. It's not going to determine our whole life. Like, it's not. And I know we're going to get there. I know we're going to get there. Thanks for listening in today. I hope this was helpful. And if you liked this episode, please subscribe. I definitely have more content coming your way, and I would love to see you back on this channel.